Hi guys, welcome back to our fourth season of the Shelf Impactors podcast, now in video mode on both Spotify and YouTube. This season begins with the topic that many of our listeners and now viewers will know very well. It's the ongoing debate of which is better, big agency versus small agency. Hope you enjoy the new format. Let's roll the tape.
Hey Mark, how you going?
Very good, Lise. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. We thought we would talk today about the big agency versus the small agency world. We've both worked for big agencies. You yourself, Mark, independent, you have your own agency. And so I think it's a really good standpoint because we both work for both. And so we can discuss perhaps some of the pluses and minuses from our side, from our point of view, for anyone's listening to us and wondering whether they should be at Land or whether they should be at their own freelance independent. And also maybe even for clients, we can look at it from their perspective too. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think the first off, I wanted to just determine what is a big agency and what's a small agency, because that's probably a nice, because there's so many definitions. And I guess I must stress that certainly from my perspective, when we're talking about design agencies specifically catering for branding and packaging. Obviously, we know there's larger marketing creative agencies, some of whom are colossal. But I think certainly within our realm and our field, it's sort of branding and packaging. I did write a little bit of a scope of what I thought. I had four. So if we start right at the top, the go big or go home, the big agency. So I've got typically 50 plus employees, maybe more, but 50 plus is, so I obviously know they get into the hundreds. Then you've got your medium, which is 10 to 50 employees, your sort of boutique agencies, if you like. And then you got your even smaller ones, which is 2 to 5 employees, which is I'm in this sort of realm. And then you've got the freelance, the go it alone fellas who are typically one person. So, and most of my work is in that very small realm. So I'm going to be, if you like, batting for that side today.
And I guess I'm completely the opposite. I come from an agency that is going through a big global merger to make it even bigger. And this is definitely the biggest place that I've ever worked.
Yeah. How big is it, Liz? Give me an idea.
Well, globally, it's huge. I mean, in Sydney, we probably have 50 people working with us. And we kind of call ourselves the small big agency because I do feel, and it's one of the reasons I stayed there, is because our own team is quite small. You get to deal with it's very personable. You get to know everyone. But ultimately, we're also still part of this huge content creation machine globally, of which there's for and against. And I'm sure we can debate some of those too. And like yourself, I've worked by myself, for myself, and realize the good and the bad of both.
Yeah.
And
So I think what I thought really quite interesting, as you said, is in your intro, is we look at it from an employee's perspective, but then also from a customer's perspective, and we'll dip in and out of those because they sort of intertwine, I think. But if we kick off and the big agency environments and the big agency setups, what are the pros as an employee? I think this is an easy one to sort of run through, I think, because there are many, aren't there?
Yeah, and I would say from my perspective, I've been at SGK for 4 years now. And when I first joined, one of the things they could very proudly say at the tail end of COVID, they lost no one during COVID. All of their employees remained as staff throughout COVID. And I think that's a big thing for a big agency. I've also been part of agencies, smaller agencies, where if you lose a big account and accounts change all the time, that's creative, you have to lose people. And so I think the scalability, I think bigger agencies probably have resources they can dip into where they're not so hasty to make a decision. Whereas small agencies will obviously have to go, I'm sorry, we just don't have the funding and the backing to cover it even for a short period of time. So I think there's probably a for and an against there for a big agency. What else? I mean, big agency wise, in theory, you've got more access to different resources. There's also then a risk of becoming a jack of all trades. They think you do everything because you've got different departments within your agency. There are better processes, perhaps, and workflows, but that also comes a negative of having to ask a lot more permission to get through those kind of brick walls sometimes.
Yeah.
And
So
I think
you've worked with big agencies for quite a while, haven't you? You've done both across your career, and likewise, I've done the same. In fairness, even working as a freelancer, you're often working with bigger design agencies, so you get to get a feel for both. From my perspective, I think starting off your career, I think it's it would benefit anyone who's sort of at the outset of their sort of design career is starting within a big agency, because it gives you a perspective of the whole breadth of what the agency can offer. You can then work on many different types of projects, because some of your smaller boutique agencies will generally focus on a particular category, for example, or area, be it alcoholic drinks or strictly a category within FMCG or CPG. Yet the bigger agencies will have a wider gamut of things to work on. And you get to work with different levels of the team. So you'll be working with creative directors, maybe executive creative directors, right the way down to design directors and mid senior designers. So I think that allows you to give you a broader breadth to improve your portfolio, but also improve your skill sets. But I do think anyone building their career in the first 10 years needs to try and touch both the smaller end of the agency side and the bigger end, if you can. Again, it's not like it's like we don't choose necessarily who we work. We'd go where who will take us, certainly in our first part of our career.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And I think, and it's interesting you say that, because I've literally had a fresh graduate start in my studio on Monday this week, and it's exciting to see how much energy and excitement she brings to the team. And I think it also depends on your personality type. So I think I did a mix of placements in big agencies and advertising, probably actually more when I graduated, and then went into smaller agencies, packaging and brand agencies. And actually, it built for confidence building. The smaller agencies are better because you don't get to consistently work with the same people. You become a bit anonymous in a big agency. But to your point, it's really good to learn systems, to work with a variety of people, to try lots of different things. And I think probably when you're young and fresh, like, you just need exposure to lots of things to figure out what you want to do, or where your skill sets lie. But for me, I was really shy as a junior designer, and those big agencies, I kind of just hid away. Whereas once I became in a small, kind of your medium size, I guess, there was still more than 10 people there, but it was working with consistent people, learning a niche, learning things in detail. That really grew me personally. So I think it also depends a bit on where you feel you can thrive. Perhaps if you've got a bit more confidence, a big agency, you can kind of make yourself known and get in everywhere to learn everything. Otherwise, I think you can hide away a little bit.
And the other most important thing about those big agencies, and the more successful ones, the ones which have been around for, I'd say, 10, 15, 20 years plus, they've managed to create and develop and improve their culture throughout time, as they understand the progress that someone starting out within the business needs to go through, not just in sort of the creative, but also in the account side as well. But they will carry them through and almost go through the step changes. If you're in a smaller agency, the fly by the seat of your pants, no one knows what's happening. The processes that are involved in the bigger agencies help sort of manifest a career path for you. My pros, if you like, is a little bit of an overview. I've got flexibility and agility. Sorry, that's a con. What are we talking about here? I'm forgetting the pros. My list, I've gone through the wrong list here. So scalability, comprehensive services, reputation and portfolio, obviously, because they've been existing for quite a while. Established processes and project management, which I think is really important. Certainly for the larger corporate clients, that's what they need. The agency and the customer need to dovetail together, and the processes need to dovetail together, and the bigger agencies have all these systems in place. But to be honest, smaller agencies now, I think, are now in that realm as well. They all have their sort of project management tools in place. They're not all running off Excel spreadsheets and sort of having the creative director stroke founder has everything in his head and he controls everything, or she controls everything. It's now being passed down into something a little bit more organized. And I think I was just going to think of examples of the bigger agencies. From my perspective, from our perspective, I've got Design Bridge, JKR, Pearl Fisher, Brand Opus, Bulletproof, Elmwood. The ones that we know are the sort of the sweet spots. And then you've got the big boys, such as the SGKs.
And it's interesting that, I mean, do you say big by reputation as well? So I think, and that's what clients will look at as well. They'll go, actually, I want to work with the JKRs because I want everyone to ask me who did my branding, and I want to be able to say them. So I think big is also reputation as well. We're a huge agency. In all honesty, I'm not totally sure very many people know exactly what we do. And we don't talk about ourselves super well. I mean, the merger that we're going through at the moment, we should get better. It should solve all of those things. But I think necessarily size doesn't necessarily always mean big. For clients and for us. I mean, if you ask, a junior designer to name the top 10 agents, they probably name some of the ones that you've just named there. And so that means they're big. And then also I'd love to ask the question to you, Mark. Do you think that big needs to be global, or is big in one country fine?
Really interesting point. And again, I was thinking about this morning before we went on the podcast. Yeah, having a global agency, and by global, we're talking about an agency that has perhaps multiple sites over multiple regions, maybe in 2 regions. Some have just got one in London and one in New York, for example. But the strength of those agencies isn't necessarily the creative that they can produce in one country. It's what they can produce across both regions or multiple regions. So, and we've had this discussion many times before. It's about boots on the ground. You need your creative team, whoever's working in whatever region, to be from that region ideally and know it culturally, economically. They need to know exactly what brands they're working on. The heritage brands, for example, if you've got a rebrand for a heritage brand and you're not from that country, you can't deliver the right amount of I guess emotional input that someone who's lived and breathed that country. And I think we found the same actually years and years ago when we were working at Equator. You and I work in the Sydney office, and there were some of the older brands that we were working on, which I knew I didn't get the cultural influences that they really had, or the cultural background they had. So I guess my point is, you need to be have your agency employees, some of them at least, if not the majority, who are from that region. When it's sorry, I was just going to finish off, Liz. The multi-region agencies, you could almost argue they're separate agencies in the first place, because you've got your Sydney office and your London office, for example, or London studio. And yes, they can help one another out, but you need the main sort of creative resource to be sort of coming from that region. So yeah, I guess in a roundabout way, I'm saying the global agency is made up of lots of small agencies, but bound together. And I don't know if you agree with that.
No, I agree. I think it's really relevant. And that's why I said to you about Sydney, it feels like a small agency, even though we're part of a big network. So I think when there are global connections, it's more about the network that you have. And we've always said when we worked at Equator, occasionally you get brands that were sold into China. I had the opportunity within Vibe Creative to work on brands sold into China, but I'd never been to China at that point. And I just think how much more enhanced I was having lived there, how much more I understood a culture. So I think to your point, if you're a client, and let's put our client hat on, I want an agency that's exposed to the culture I'm trying to sell into. I mean, that's relevant. Right now, we're working on some Australian brands that want to sell into Asia or want to sell into Dubai. So knowing that market is actually more important than the brand and its Australianness. You kind of need to know both. So no, I completely agree. It doesn't make it big just because you're global. But if I was a client, I'd want to know that however big the agency was, they've got exposure to that culture rather than I'm in New York and I'm designing for Vietnam. That might not necessarily work.
Yeah, by cultural differences, we're talking about just nuances in the languages. Even if you've got 2 English-speaking countries, say when working for brands which are Australian and from the UK, the packs will differ slightly. There are colours, semiotics. What's it, semiotic? Whatever the word is. You know what I mean? There are just little differences you need to make, even if it's the same product, the same brand. It's just got to hit the customer in the right region.
Especially in the food and beverage or FMCG sector, I mean, we do an awful lot of photography in our studio. We do a lot of photography briefs. We also work really closely with our Singapore studio, but we can't let the Singapore studio do photography briefs, only because the things that we're shooting, what we're creating, serving suggestions, something as simple as a serving suggestion, in Australia would be completely different to what their background or experience is in Singapore or wherever it is that we might want to work with. So we kind of need foodies in Australia on the ground. I'm not the most cultural food suggestion foodie. I'm like yourself, Mark, we're very functional, chicken and broccoli or whatever it is. But, I don't know what necessarily herbs and spices will go with a dish that's also culturally relevant to Australia. So I think that's especially with food and beverage, it's really important. And then if you're doing anything that's not necessarily pack design, if it's any content creation, content needs to be relevant to that market. Asian markets are wildly different into how they shop compared to us. So when we're doing shopper marketing campaigns and stuff, we have to reach out to our colleagues over there because we don't have a clue how people shop and the different portals that they shop on. And that might affect how a brand might market and promote and talk about itself. And so I think it's definitely.
that's a huge benefit then, isn't it, for the big agency? We're talking about these sort of global boots on the ground type setups. So it's about the cohesion between the agents, between those sites to form that one big agency. It's particularly difficult, I think, and this is where many have failed in the past, many designers. You know, a lot of the London agencies who were looking to expand, looking to go into either the US or even Asia, for example. I think they struggled, and some of those, I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, where I knew that a lot of agencies were looking to do it and they just closed down and they just couldn't do it. It's translating that information from site to site and thinking that your creative team can provide the right creative for the region, which is on the other side of the world, for example.
But then also, based on our last conversation, or one of our last conversations on AI, that's opening doors that we could never experience before. It's got translation, it's got trends and insights that will give you doorways, visions of worlds you've never been into.
Right.
So I actually think that makes research easier, and the more streamlined that gets. Like, we're playing with tools now that will give us insights into different countries' trends and stuff that you would never have known about, and then also translate that to how people shop and think. It's wild how that will help us design from anywhere for anywhere. But that also depends on the creative and how open you are to absorbing that knowledge, right? And actually putting yourself in the shoes of someone who's in that culture. Just reading it isn't necessarily enough.
Well, like yourself, for someone like you who's obviously moved in many different continents and worked in different continents, you become adaptable. And it's a skill in its own right to be able to work in different countries. So let's say Australia, China, Singapore as well. Did you do Singapore for a bit? I can't remember in Singapore or not.
No, I just visited Singapore. It was just China. I've done a bit across America. And then
Yes, that's right.
here.
So it's being able to adapt and sort of, but I mean, being able to, just put your feet in their shoes, in their sort of customer shoes in each country. It's a little, I don't know, liking it. It's a little bit like us working on categories, which are entirely opposite to, I mean, I've used this example before. For me, working on a feminine hygiene brand is a challenge because you've got to put your feet into the shoes of the
We've
consumer.
all done it, Mark. I remember those projects when we were together working at Equator.
So exactly. So that is one of those challenges, but it's down to the designer. And I can't say I was particularly good in that particular project because I think it's a struggle.
It's also sometimes where creativity thrives, because if you can help yourself understand it and then re-communicate it back to whoever. Like, we're doing projects this year, corporate rebrands. Like, my background isn't in corporate, but we figure it out. And actually, in helping yourself understand it, you produce a better level of creative, because you're not just churning out what you're familiar with. You're really getting to the heart and to know it. And to your point, if you move in a different country or you're just working on something you're not used to, there's a craft, I think, with some niches like drinks branding and stuff. I think there's a real craft that comes with experience and niching down in that. But in terms of categories or types of design, even with us, with digital, with moving content, with doing brand videos and things, we're learning so much because we didn't originally know so much about it.
Yeah.
But that makes you want to learn more. It makes you want to get deeper in there, perhaps, than someone who's actually done it 20 years and is a bit set in their ways.
That's interesting, because that then also brings us on to the way in which a larger agency, big agency, can scale up. If there's something new that they need to be able to adopt a new skill set, they can bring on a small team to teach the rest of the team, or bring on a bespoke team. Yet the smaller agencies or the one-man bands, they either can't accept the project, or they take it on and just try and learn on the wing, on the hoof. But so what about the smaller agency, please? Let me say smaller agencies. What do you think? Should we cover the 2 to 10 freelancers to?
I would say 2 to 10, because, and I actually have a different thought about, because freelancers, I think, when you have a project, I think actually freelancers are better at finding people to network with and go, I need a video, I'll find a video producer because I can't do that. Whereas once you get to 2 or 10, normally you go like, someone here must be able to do it, or we'll turn it down.
Yes, that's true. Okay, let's go to the 2 to 10. So what do we think the benefits, the strengths, the pros of a smaller agency versus the big boys?
I think it's more personalized services. It is a bit more flexible, because you might think a big agency is a bit more nimble and agile, but sometimes you have to go through so many processes, down to quoting, down to approvals, down to getting the technology or the time and things that you need. It's a challenge. And for small agencies, you literally can turn to the person next to you, hey, I need a bit more time to do this. And they go, that's not a problem. Your creative director is normally there, hey, I'm struggling with this, can you help? Where actually in bigger agencies, people are less accessible, and that sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. So definitely small agencies, I think they're a bit more flexible. I would say they're a bit more adaptable.
I've got here, the top one I've got here is personalized attention. So you know that if you've got one for example, you're a client and you're going to be dealing with one particular team, one person in the accounts team, or there might even be your only account manager. That's who you're dealing with, and they're going to guide you through that project. Yet the bigger agencies, it might well be that someone goes away on leave or it gets pulled out onto a different project, a bigger client, then they have to hand it off to someone else. Yeah, the personalized attention, you get it. I think one thing we had to note is, from an employee's perspective, is the cultural differences in the bigger agencies held in a little bit of cotton wool in many respects. That you're likely to only have, let's say, the old 9 to 5 working hours, and you're supposed to get out the office at 5 and go in. Yeah, the smaller agencies, you know what it's like. Yeah, do the all-nighters. Someone brings the pizzas in. Oh, pizza, I want pizza.
That's a really good point. I didn't really think about it from that perspective, Mark. Yeah. Actually, like I've worked a lot later in the smaller agencies.
And you're accountable.
Weekends, yeah, of course. Whereas actually, even at the level I'm at now, I rarely work stupidly late. We'll have like late calls, and none of my team are expected to.
That's it.
So that's a really good point. I didn't think about it.
Sorry, just go on.
No, carry on.
Just the smaller agencies now are perhaps, and have to be, I think, just because of human rights, employee rights, and HR, you can't get your.
Right. You're correct. Like there was a big thing went around to all Australian employees. It's not even just in our industry or our agency that says between these hours you are not required to respond to emails or whatever. Like the law says outside of these hours you don't have to. No one can say anything to you if you don't, between 9 and 5 you don't respond.
Clients don't always think that, and especially if you're in a bigger agency and you're working in a different continent, for example, you've got to be on on call at least. So your phone must be going. And what time? Right. Here we go. We're 9:30 here, and what are you at the moment?
8:30. It's not late. But I just, I have messages come through at 5:30 in the morning from one of my colleagues who it just works better at that time, whereas I'm a night person and we already go like, don't expect you to reply, but here you go. But I wish you were on Instagram, Mark, but there was a little meme that I sent to my team this morning where it's someone walking to the edge of a swimming pool going, I'm ready to clock up at 5 o'clock on a Friday. And this last minute design change asteroid comes in and explodes the swimming pool.
At 5, yes.
And you're like, have to do it. Like it's still, the work needs to be done. There's always going to be someone. We used to have a policy that our boss said of after 3 o'clock, you can say no to meetings on a Friday after 3 o'clock. Yes. It's just not possible. Like there's not a chance that after 3 o'clock, I'm just going, no, it's after 3 o'clock on a Friday, I can't. It's just not possible.
Yeah. Like I said, I think culturally, again, not just our industry, most industries now are maybe not in this new Trump era, but certainly 3 months ago. I hope not. 3 months ago, it was certainly a case of, we know that you've got sort of workers' rights and you're slightly protected. Slightly different as a freelancer, because we're talking about the one-man band. As a freelancer, you're having to fight for every hour is important to you, and every hour you can invoice is important to you. So most freelancers are prepared to work beyond the sort of standard studio hours, and they will. And they don't necessarily, and certainly I don't charge. It's not an overtime hour, it's an hour or whatever it is, just a couple of hours at normal rate, but it's just so you can sort of clock up your timesheet. So yeah, that's one of those challenges. And what are the cons? I think that these are obvious, really. What do you think the cons are of using a small
of a small agency? I think you've got less brand recognition, like the studio that you work for. There are so very many, and I always think about this in our previous conversations, if there are so many design agencies and independent designers and creative studios out there, and a lot of us can do the same things. We might say we're different to that person, and we all have that. But so people buy into people, and so I think the smaller agencies people don't know about as much. They don't get it. I mean, there's always those ones that you see on the die line, mouse graphics in Greece, and you go, oh my god, like they're famous for like a year, and then everyone forgets who they are, but they're still doing great work.
Yeah.
But no one really remembers them. Even when you think of some of the studios that you or I have worked at, do you remember them? Are they first that come to mind?
Yeah.
Probably only because you've worked there. So that's I think true. In terms of recognition and as a client and as an employee, right? You want to say you work with some great agencies. How relevant that is for one person to another is different. But I always wanted to have something that said I'd work with and even now people go, oh, you freelanced at wherever. It doesn't mean anything to me, but to some people, it's relevant. And when you're fresh in your career, you kind of want to work for the best.
Yeah, very true.
And so what defines the best? Often it's not the two studio people.
Yeah. Well, it's the creative work, or is it the turnover? And I think that's the important thing to realise, is a lot of the sexy work that we see, the glossy stuff isn't necessarily the stuff that's paying that agency to do its day-to-day job. It's where they're making their money fundamentally, for the most part, and SGK especially, is the unsexy stuff, but it's stuff that pays. It's the rollouts, the artwork, the repro, the stuff that some small agencies don't necessarily do, but the big agencies can do it, and that's where the profit margins are.
Yeah. And I've always thought this as a designer, you can make any problem a challenge. So even down to your feminine care, you're still solving a problem for someone. Yeah. And so just because it's not a sexy brief, you can make it a brief where you're helping someone in their journey. You're helping someone navigate that space. And so sometimes it's a frame of mind. Everyone's like, I want to do all the sexy work. And to your point, a lot of the work we do every day is not sexy.
Yeah.
When you often speak to one of your colleagues, what you're working on today, and they're like, adult diapers.
Yeah.
Like, great.
Stage 54, oh my goodness. And this is where I think as a freelancer, whether you're on stage 1 sort of creative development, or you're on stage 55 creative finalization version 55, you're still paying for those hours. But as an agency, there's a certain point where you're doing a project where you're no longer in profit because you're spending so many hours working on something which, the client's only prepared to pay, let's say, a set number of hours, and you're thinking, listen, unfortunately, it's double it. We've got to double the hours because you've asked us to make 1 million amends.
What about your thoughts on freelance versus small agencies, Mark? You've obviously managed to run your own business really successfully. I always think of you as such a niche in the whole booze and drinks. Like, I think about some of the craft work you did on that. And so I think it really helps you to have a niche. That must be a benefit of being a small agency. People know you're good at a thing, so they'll come to you for that.
And that's what you try and promote yourself as. And a lot of agencies they'll try and give themselves we are specialists in, and be it alcoholic drinks or another area. And the benefits are, culturally as a freelancer, you're flexible. That if I, not this ever happens, but if my other half, Lorraine, says to me, Mark, on Friday, I want to go to the beach. Our son's not going to school. So, okay, I'll try and adapt my timescales, so we can make it work. And so there is a degree of flexibility. I'm not an employee as such that I have to report into an office, clock in, clock out type thing. There's that flexibility. And in terms of the projects I get to work on, there's a degree of selection, but it depends on, most freelancers will take on the project. They're not necessarily all yes men, but they will say yes to most things. There are certain things they won't do if it sort of goes against their the way in which they think or their morals. I mean, for example, some people and some agencies are the same. They won't work on alcoholic drinks. They won't work on tobacco. Yet as a freelancer, I wouldn't say I'm immoral, but I have done and worked in the past on both of those things and all of them. And I quite enjoy them, if I'm honest. They're quite specialist, and it's a creative challenge. So yeah, the benefits of the small agencies, for me, for clarity, I do freelance work under my own name, and I do sometimes project work for clients where I will then bring in resource to help me out. So be it a photographer or an art worker, or even sometimes I have had a project manager involved in the past. So yeah, I'm probably in the freelancer small agency, sort of very small, sort of 2-3 people for most sometimes. I look back upon my career and I have fond memories of both. I love the big agency stuff. I love the memories I've got from, and even in-house, which you haven't spoken about actually. I've worked in-house in my sort of initial stages of my career for a brewery, Molson Coors, or Bass as it was. And the skills I learned there were sort of my grounding for life, really. So there are massive benefits to both big and in-house and small. I think right now in my sort of stage of my career in life, freelance suits me for the fact that I live out in the sticks. And if I have to go work as a freelancer in-house or in a studio, it's quite difficult because there aren't many out in the wilderness here. Other than me. In fact, to be fair, if I do a Google search in this local area, a lot of freelancers have done the same as me and sort of work as a small agency. So you've got one or two, but they are me. They're sort of 1-2-man bands. So yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think for me, in summary, I think from both the customer's perspective and the employee's perspective, you have to do what works for you. Some people feel like that's their calling, to work in a big agency, and that's where they want to be, and they'll climb up their career. Others thinking, no, I want the independence, I want the flexibility, and I will choose the freelance, smoke, small agency. So yeah, my summary for the whole thing would be, you have to select what works for you. And definitely from a customer's perspective, from a customer, cheaper, probably for the small agency side, maybe not always, and you get a bit of flexibility. You get the size and the scale with the bigger agency, but then you probably get the invoices as big as well.
So I don't always agree that the bigger agency is the bigger invoice. My experience has told me that's not always the case. But again, I think it's also, for me, it's about, I never thought I'd be a big agency person, but the people I work with make the big agency feel small to me. And I love I love being able to learn from global and some of the opportunities it allows me to learn in different spaces. But I've also really, and to your point, I've also enjoyed pockets where I've been in smaller agencies. Part of there's more of a culture for like, let's go for a drink after work when you're there till like 10 o'clock at night working. There's a bit more of that kind of culture. It kind of feels a little bit more cliquey in the smaller agencies. I'm not someone who, I don't really enjoy freelancing, not because I can't do it. I love working directly with clients, but I miss nurturing people or being around people sometimes. I like the kind of combination that I have right now. But I don't, yeah, I think you have to experience lots of different things and then figure out what works for you. Bigger doesn't always mean better. It depends
Yeah.
on the people within the bigger. Like I found a great bunch of people to work with, so it doesn't feel like this big global entity. By the same token, I know when I put my employee number in, I'm just a number. So I
Yeah,
think
it's true.
there's always that, like, you're still a number at the end of the day when you're in
Well, there's
part
a
of a
degree
big
of comfort,
business.
isn't there? And I think touching on this very quickly, as a freelancer, you're not on a full payroll. You're not being paid on a weekly, monthly basis regularly. Your income varies, and it's like there are peaks and troughs throughout the year. And to be honest, there's no rhyme or reason to when those peaks and troughs sit or when they are. But you do have times when you're a bit worried and think, should I go back into the full-time world? I want a full-time job, so I've got at least a constant income. Yet the flexibility of the freelancer allows you when freelancing is good and you've got lots of work, it's great. You think this is brilliant. I'm the entrepreneur, I'm doing really well. But when it's not so good, you get really worried. And every freelancer knows that feeling where you get that pit in your stomach fear of what's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah.
I've got no job on. Or next week, next month, I've got nothing coming through. And it is a worry. Certainly when you've got responsibilities. So
Also there's times in your life when actually you don't want as much responsibility as well. So it allows you to flex up and down. Whereas you know what it's like, everyone who has a 9 to 5 job or whatever hours job it is in creative, that's a commitment too. And sometimes there are times in your life when you don't need quite that much commitment.
yeah, it's true. And you choose lifestyle, don't you? Your lifestyle is important to you, your choice of lifestyle. Do you want to be commuting? Do you want to be living in the middle of a city to get to that big agency? Like myself, do you want to live in the country? Get horse and cart into the city when you need to.
They're like a reversal of time. That was a really
Yeah.
good debate, Mark. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, me too. Thanks ever so much, Lise. It's one of these things that I think we can always go back to because things are changing. Culturally, all these companies are changing. Our remote workings work, it's like you almost work in a freelancer type capacity sometimes, yet you're an employee of one of the biggest agencies in the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fantastic. I really loved it. Thank you very much, Lisa.
You too, Mark.